Welcome.
Thank you very much. I hope you can see everything. Wonderful. In 1933, when the National Socialists came to power, the Jewish community of Berlin numbered 170,000 members, about 1/3 of the Jewish population of the German Reich. They had a dense network of private and official institutions that had been continuously developed since the settlement of the first Jews of modern times in 17th century. Jews were admitted again by Great Elector Friedrich Wilhelm von Brandenburg in 1671. After the 30 Years' War, the Kurfürst aimed at strengthening the economy and therefore allowed Dutch, Huguenots, and Jews to settle in the city. While the about 100 Huguenots were allowed to take up residence in all parts of the city, the 50 wealthy Jewish families expelled from Vienna were allowed to settle only in Old Berlin at the edge of the old city. When they arrived, they encountered two German court Jews families that had been living here for 6 years. We may therefore assume that a first private prayer room already existed in the northern part of Spandauer Straße, where Jost Liebmann and Israel Aaron lived. And I hope you can see it. These German Jews lived somewhere here, and the new Austrian Jews were admitted to live here. The Austrian refugees were not readily welcomed by the established court Jews, and a long struggle for power began. The distance between the two groups can virtually be seen on the map, where the German Jews have their center situated in the northern part of the old city, while the Austrian Jews had their prayer rooms to the south in Jüdenstraße. And to make it easier for you to understand where we are situated in Berlin, I put this historic map onto the map of 2016. So you see the Alexanderplatz in this region, and Marienkirche is here. So about 200 Jews lived in Berlin during the first few years of this resettlement. The authorities did not intend to establish a permanent, long-lasting Jewish colony. The first permission decree had a duration of 20 years only, and Jews who built or bought a house were not allowed to sell it to Jews, but were allowed to sell it only to Christians. Anyhow, the Jewish community grew and expanded. To research its topography, we analyzed the Jewish dwelling places. For Berlin, detailed address books are preserved since 1799 for nearly each year. And they are listing the inhabitants of each house. You can see it here for the Spandauer Straße. The problem is that not always Jews can be clearly discerned by their names, so that this method does not give precise results. But prayer rooms or Jewish schools were recorded by the authorities, and their distribution gives a clear picture of the Jewish topography of Berlin throughout the ages. During the first half of the 18th century, the spread of private prayer rooms is remarkable. It's still concentrated mainly around the two focal points, but step by step, new areas were conquered. Until 1750, the Jewish community had grown by 10 times. 2,188 Jews lived now in Berlin, which made about 2% of the total population. To compare, today's Germany then had a Jewish population of about 60 to 70,000, and the great community in Frankfurt also had only about 3,000 Jews, who were forced to cluster in the Jewish ghetto of Judengasse. In Berlin, until 1714, no clear center of Jewish life existed. This changed with the inauguration of the first synagogue in Heidereuter Gasse, on a plot that was bought by the Jewish community. It was difficult to find a location at a reasonable price, and this neighborhood did not have the best reputation at that time. The executioner lived in Heidereuter Gasse, since he was also responsible for the discipline of the prostitutes in Rosengasse nearby. After the building of the synagogue Heidereuter Gasse, private prayer rooms were prohibited by the authorities, and this was appreciated even by the Jewish community itself, which wanted to concentrate the prayer in the new synagogue to ensure financial means. Anyhow, private prayer rooms continued to exist illegally or with special permit. And the map of 1812 shows how the number developed, and it clearly states that the distance to the main synagogue could not have been the reason for the existence of private prayer rooms, as it was often claimed by the owners. Regarding the schools, which you see here in yellow, the development at the beginning of the 19th century is even more remarkable. By the end of the 18th century, we find only the Jewish free school, Chinuch Ne'arim, founded privately in 1778 by two influential members of the Jewish community, David Friedländer and Isaac Daniel Itzik. At this time, Jewish education of the poor was mainly traditional in the Cheder, where usually Polish teachers taught basics of Hebrew and Talmud. The upper-class Jews had private teachers for their children, which were educated also in foreign languages and in sciences. In early 19th century, this situation changed, and education became more and more important together with the Enlightenment and the Haskalah. At the time of the Law of Emancipation of 1812, only 3 schools with the traditional Talmud Torah training were left. Jumping into the second half of the 19th century, we see the expansion of the city on the Meinhardplan of 1871. You see here the old center of Berlin, and everything around the center was erected new. And a new important landmark in Jewish Berlin was the new synagogue Oranienburger Straße, opened in 1866, which you find here on the left on the map. Oranienburger Straße was one main street of the new Spandauer Vorstadt, the Spandau suburbs, which became more and more attractive. There already had been a Jewish place in that street for more than 150 years. This green point which you see on the map. Shortly after the arrival of the Austrian Jews in 1672, a plot in Spandauer Vorstadt, then outside the city walls but at a short distance, was acquired to establish a Jewish cemetery. Later, the Jews were forced to erect a building on Oranienburger Straße to hide the cemetery behind it. And it is said that the king himself, he demanded a building so that he would not see the Jewish cemetery when he passes the street. The Jewish hospital that was built here in 1752, a large 3-story building, is still preserved until today, but its Jewish history remains rather unknown. However, investigations by the Institution for the Protection of Monuments have shown that the building, which today appears to be divided into 3 parts, was erected as one large building. You see on the picture these 2 yellow buildings and the white building. They all belong to this really very large Judenlazarett. The situation in 1870 clearly shows that at that time, There was a dense Jewish center around the old synagogue in Heidereuter Gasse, with schools, mikveh, community buildings, Talmud Torah, etc. And that a new center had developed to its northwest with the new synagogue following the Reformed Rite. Both centers contained mainly institutions of the official Jewish community, while other private schools and prayer rooms of societies were found in other places of the city too. How this development continued and quickly also reached the outskirts can be seen in the next map of 1900. Since the 1880s, many Jews from Eastern Europe had arrived in Berlin, escaping the pogroms. These so-called Ostjuden formed separate groups in many German cities. In Berlin, the Scheunenviertel, not far from the Heidereuter Gasse, became the new Eastern Jewish Städte, a kind of Mea Shearim of Berlin. Until today, this area is known for its Jewish history, and it appears in tourist guidebooks, although not much is left. And you find this area of the Scheunenviertel in this area. In the 1920s, many of the wealthy Jews settled in the new high society neighborhoods that had developed since the end of the 19th century, when the affluent inhabitants moved towards the New West, what meant Tiergarten and then Charlottenburg, Wilmersdorf, and Grunewald. From 1895 to 1910, so in 15 years, the number of Jews of Charlottenburg raised from about 4,600 to 22,500. That made about 8% of the population of this area. And especially the main street, the Kurfürstendamm, there, according to a statistic of 1910, every fourth inhabitant was Jewish. About 8,000 Jews lived in this street. And you can see this on the map. In this is the new region where the Jews moved from this older part of the city. The map of 1933 shows the distribution of Jewish services. Since the 1870s, synagogue buildings were erected in all parts of the city. Since the end of the 19th century, numerous synagogue societies were founded, which were mostly private but obtained financial support from the Jewish community of Berlin. In addition, a dense network of cultural and welfare institutions was established, such as orphanages, old people's homes, but also theaters, libraries, sports fields, everything. The map shows that the synagogues in red formed new decentralized hearts of the Jewish life in these different areas of Berlin. And one building in Charlottenburg, in Meinecke Straße 10, became an especially important center of Berlin Jewry during the 1930s, since Zionist institutions and the Palestine office were situated here. More than 18,000 Jews found help in this building to escape Nazi Germany. Jewish schools became even more important at that time, and in addition, another type of education was created, and we already heard about it in the first panel, schools to prepare for emigration. In Germany, they are called Umschulungslehrgänge, which means professional retraining courses for adults. They were mainly organized by the Jewish community and took place from about 1937 until 1941. And you can see that they are really distributed in every place of the city. They were mostly in different craft buildings and that existed. And at this time, after the Pogromnacht, few synagogues were still in use. You see them marked with this circle. And most of them were in use until spring 1940. In autumn 1941, there lived about 164,000 Jews in Germany, and nearly half of them lived in Berlin. And the last official service in the synagogue was held at the Synagogue Heidereuter Gasse on November 20, 1942. The very last place in Jewish topography of Nazi era was the Jewish hospital in Wedding. It was the only official institution that was allowed to continue its work, although under strict surveillance. It served as a kind of ghetto and transit camp for ill Jews on their way to deportation to the concentration camps. The once dense network of Jewish life that had covered the whole city was now reduced to this single building or single complex. But it was also from here where new Jewish life developed shortly after the end of the war. On May 11, 1945, one of the first services took place here in the hospital, led by a Soviet army rabbi, and in 1946, the hospital synagogue was reopened after restoration works. Thank you very much.